everyone, to the LCS post-game lobby after a fantastic introduction by Medic. I am Shox, and I am joined here by the Official, by Amazing, and by Reckless. I'm excited for this one. This seems like a good lineup.
You went downhill there on the names. Started high, and then it dropped a little bit, and then crashed over there somewhere.
Yeah, well, we just saw the last game of the day. Every game has been crazy, but I do want to talk about Unicorns of Love G2 just a little bit. Somehow G2 won. You're always talking about the right way that people win games. You were mad that Vitality, the way they did it.
They stole that game.
So what about this G2 win, Official?
I mean, they didn't win the perfect game, that's for sure. I thought they lost. I thought this was it, but then Wonder stepped up, and this is why he's the all-pro top laner for me.
All right, well, we'll see later. Reckless is also going to tell us his all-pro list. Reckless, we saw an Ezreal for Yarnan. There's been a lot of discussion in the community also about Ezreal, and people don't seem to like it. And obviously, you need to be a pretty good player. You said before, well, if you don't get hit in the fight and you can survive, then obviously you can dish out the damage, but you need to be in it for a long time. But what do you make of Ezreal as a competitive pick in Europe?
I think for most teams, it's probably not that great because most teams are not good enough to play the champion to begin with. So I would not suggest this if you are pretty much any team that's not ourselves, maybe. I mean, I think our early game is not that great yet either, so I would not suggest this for us either. Like, if I were to play a semifinals right now, for example, I would never play Ezreal, ever. Because I think we just can't end the game quick enough before the enemy team gets a chance to carry with whatever hyper carry they have going. But I think if you have like a pretty good early game, then Ezreal is a really strong champion. He wins pretty much every lane, is most likely the only AD carry I would say that can reliably lane into Syra Khan. So I think that's why they picked it in this case, for example. They just wanted a secure.
They're saying Yarnan is really good, because even in that kind of a game, he could use the Ezreal to win.
Well, I would say that Samux is not really bad, but I would say Samux is not good enough
Maybe not in this game.
to carry. Like, if you put pretty much like 50% of the bot lanes in Europe on Syra Khan, they will do a lot more than Samux and Totora did this game. So I was a bit disappointed because I felt like Unicorns, I mean, everyone could see it, right? They had like the biggest lead we've seen in a long time, and they had like all the vision, and they had the Baron setup and everything, and then they just throw it out the window like for no real reason. And it wasn't like G2 were playing good either as a team. They were just better individually, and I think that's kind of sad in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it is sad for the Unicorns of Love, as I think we're still getting some sounds of the game.
I was about to say, am I the only one who's going crazy? Am I hearing
I don't hear anything, it's fine.
Okay, the atmosphere of the game. So, Maurice, when you talk about teams that are that need to grab their playoff spot, this is heartbreaking for Unicorns of Love, but they could say that they let this game at least slip through their hands.
Yeah, and I think that's been the story for Unicorns in the Love games, this split, where they actually get early leads, they actually look really good, and then suddenly look extremely bad. And that transition is just really weird, because for me, when I think about it, like, especially from a jungle perspective, I obviously see a lot of similarities to my last split in Origin, like to Cold, where you're fighting for survival, and there's just nothing you can do about it, and just steadily going down, at some point you just lose out, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, to see exactly where they are in the playoff race, and for more on the race for playoffs in the final week, let's head over to Medic and our standings checkup.
Thank you very much, Shox. What a day we have had. What games we have had. The match of the week, Splyce versus Vitality, and then G2 versus Unicorns of Love. Incredible action across the board. Let's have a look at exactly where everyone stands at the end of today in Medic's playoff checkup. Thankfully, I'm not QuickShot, so that's always a good thing. Important things at the top of the table. We have 4 teams locked into playoffs, but only 1 team locked into their position. Fnatic at the top, locked in #1, and their win today only helps solidify that position. G2, Splyce, and Vitality are all vying for that second place. And you have to remember how close that is, because Vitality beating Splyce today means that they are all now at 10 and 7. Basically, whoever wins tomorrow is going to be in a very good spot. In fact, if Vitality and G2 play each other, and if Vitality win that game, no matter the result of the Splyce game, Vitality will take the second spot and abide all the way through to playoffs. This is because they have beaten Splyce twice throughout the course of the split, so they would win the head-to-head if Splyce were to win their game. What matches are we really looking at for tomorrow then? Of course, G2 Vitality is exciting, but my eyes fall onto Roccat. They play up against H2K, and they are currently at 8 wins. If they can win 1 more, no one can catch them. No one can challenge them for that playoff spot, and they would solidify themselves in 5th place in the standings. The bottom of the table, however, is a lot more messy. At the moment, we have 4 teams tied at 7 and 10, with a possibility of a 5-way tie at 7 and 11 tomorrow. Games like Unicorns of Love versus Misfits and Giants versus Splice will definitely help us see exactly how things are going to progress. Now, it's always important to remember that throughout the day, every game has counted, and you could see every second counted, every minute counted. Across the course of the rest of the splits, both tomorrow and through quarterfinals and semis, every game will count. So make sure you tweet at us with that hashtag and tell us exactly who you're rooting for and why. I'm going to hand it back across towards PGL. Guys, take it away.
Thank you very much, Medic. So we came into the week with only Splice and Fnatic locked in playoffs. Now we have Splice and Fnatic and Vitality in G2 locked in playoffs with 2 spots left. So the things that I took away from that, the things that we can say for certain, because a lot is dependent on if you win but X team loses to force the tiebreaker. But Vitality beat G2, they get the bye.
Yep.
They're in 2nd place. And if Roccat beat H2K, they're in playoffs and they get that last spot. So there's a lot that can also still have to be decided. For instance, the Unicorns of Love versus Misfits match. For Unicorns of Love, it depends on a lot of factors. But Misfits, if they don't win that game, it is looking dire. And who would have thought that Misfits wouldn't make it to playoffs, Reckless?
Well, for us, it's a good thing that they might not, because I think we are probably only really looking at them as like a potential tough opponent in the best of 5 for the semifinals. So we are really hoping that they do not make it. We feel like they're just like the only team that can figure out a good enough plan to beat us, I would say. I think if we go up against any of the other teams, we should have the upper hand, including like the top 4 or top 3 other than us, I guess. So we would very much like Misfits not to make it, but for some reason they just haven't looked that great this split. I think they have like the best AD carries still, and their individual players are fine in some roles, but maybe not the others in some others.
Surprises me that you say the best AD carry still, because we looked at Hansama a lot. He was great in the beginning of the split, but he definitely didn't convince us in the last couple of weeks.
But I don't think that's his fault, though. Like, I feel like when you play against him, he just puts a lot of pressure on you, and he does it in a very smart way, where he doesn't really give you an possibility either to get back at him. Like, he's just a very good player in general, and I don't think he's playing bad by any means in their losses. I don't think he's the reason why they're losing. I think they have much bigger problems on the top side of the map. So from my perspective, it's very good for us if we don't go up against them, because I think we have a very big advantage in the bot lane otherwise if we play against pretty much anyone else. So if we were to avoid Hans and Mikkex, I think that would just be like the best situation for us.
Let me just jump in before I get your guys' 2 cents, because we do have the playoff picture so far. The only thing that is locked is Fnatic, because they are locked in the semi-finals, and there are a lot of possibilities. So I'm glad I already got your answer in that you would like to avoid Misfits, but this is also the teams that are vying for 2nd place, and that could be in that other semi-final. And the question I want to ask you guys is, how do you see these teams that are up for the 2nd place translating into best of 5s? Let's start with the G2 as we see it now. How can that team do in those best of 5s?
I honestly don't think that this lineup, with the way that they're playing right now, can translate anything into best of 5 system, because I think most of their strength last year came from Mithy and Sven, and from Trick actually being a smart jungle. That's something like people always underestimate our Trick. He was bad individually in some cases in terms of summer split, but he was still extremely smart and knew how to play against other opponents. And I think that's an advantage that Junkers doesn't have, who's individually really good. But I think he struggles against smart opponents who figure him out instead. And yeah, I really don't think that G2 has any kind of strength in the best of 5 right now.
Reckless?
I would agree. I think G2 is probably the worst of the 3 that we're looking at right now. I think Splice are a bit overhyped. Like, people were really hyping them up before this week, and now they lost today. But I mean, as you said before, like maybe it wasn't
technically won the game.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't supposed to be a game they lost, right? But I still feel like they were a bit overhyped, and they shouldn't have had all like those expectations that were built up for pretty much no reason. So I think still Vitality is the better team. I think Splice is up there though, like definitely top 3, but I think Vitality has the edge over them.
That surprises me, because I think if you'd ask these guys...
I
think Splice are better.
Yeah. So
I think,
especially in best of 5.
Why is Splice better, and then you can answer us why you think Vitality is better.
I just think like generally Splice, they're the smarter team, and typically in best of 5s, the smarter team ends up winning. I think Vitality have shown they actually can't cleanly snowball games against the best teams. They can do it against some of the bottom ones, but I think today was a good example of them having far superior early game draft, getting a 50 CS lead and an early turret in the bot lane, and then still actually messing up around fights on the top side when they shouldn't have been able to actually lose out there. They also leave, like in this case here, they actually allow Odamne to get 2 early kills on a Shen instead of swapping into his lane earlier. So I think they do make a lot of mistakes when it comes to snowballing, and I think this, like, had Splyce just been able to close out this game, we would have been sitting here saying, oh, you know what, Splyce, second place, looks solid, second best team. Not Fnatic, but second best team. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah,
so
I'd like to just hear Maurice's.
Okay, so from my point of view, it's like this. I think Splyce as a team, they're really easy to figure out. I think if you look and play against them, I think the way that they operate and play the map is really transcribed before the game even starts. You exactly know what they're going to do. I think they have no X factor that basically brings this like playmaking into the game. Whereas I think on Vitality, I think their game plans, at least through Yamato-Ken, should be like smart and like should be there. But I think in terms of X factor, I think they have a couple of players who can actually make the clutch play and actually make this deciding thing happen within the early or late game. I think that's an advantage that Splyce doesn't have because they're so meta dependent that they operate like completely towards it, and you always know what they're going to bring.
But I think the X factor and, you know, the individuals who can make the big play, it's great in best of 1, 100%. I will take what I consider the better actual team in a best of 5 and the smarter team, which I think Splyce will be. So, and I think when you talk about X factors, like, to me, Kobe has already shown if you get to the late game and they build around him, he can carry against a team like Vitality.
So this is again where it comes in, the theoretical, but in...
Oh, every time.
Yeah, because we do say for best of 1s, in best of 1s, the better team should win, but it doesn't always happen because best of 1s. But for me, it's just as controversial to be like, well, then certainly a team that knows the basics will win a best of 5, because clutch is also very important.
So
yeah, that is true.
What I mean by X Factor is not just like this playmaking, but it's also like, I do think that Vitality is completely aware of what the meta is. I think they know. I think they're able to play it, but I think they actually go this extra. I don't want to call them macro geniuses, but I think they are. they're the only team that can actually, besides Fnatic, I think right now that can play the meta, but can also like do other things besides that. I think that's something that Splyce can't do, and G2 for sure can't do.
All right, final point on that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Amazing actually. I think Splyce is the kind of team that they play semi-solid, right? Like they don't have insane macro or insane micro. They just kind of play good, decent, I would say, right? And I think I mean, I think that it's not a beneficial thing in a best of 5. I feel like in a best of 5, you really need to be sort of next level, like sort of an X factor, right? Like you need some sort of clutch player or strategy that might like catch the opponent off guard. But I feel like Splyce is just such an easy team to read into. Like they always kind of do the same thing, always kind of draft towards the same thing. So for a team like ourselves, I feel like it'd be much better to play against Splyce than Vitality, because I think we would never ever drop 3 Nexuses against Splyce. But against Vitality, we might drop like 1 or 2 in surprise, and then we're in a tough position. See, but I would much rather play Splyce in that regard. I
get that from your point of view.
Yeah, but as a team power, maybe Splyce is better than Vitality. But I'm judging from my own perspective.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
who would I want to play?
Yeah.
And I would much rather play G2, obviously. But then if not G2, Splyce, because I think for us, it would just be like, we're just better individually and as a team than Splyce, and they will not do anything crazy. So we just play the game slow and we're going to win eventually.
Yep, and that's why I think, like, for you guys, I 100% agree. Splyce needs to bring something unique.
Yeah,
but
and I don't
Splyce
think they have the player capacity to do that. Meanwhile, Vitality actually does. Like, they have a really, really good mid laner, and I think, for example, if Caps goes against Niski, we have like an already like winning condition already there, right? Meanwhile, against Jisuki, we actually have problems even in some cases. So
this actually reminds me a little bit of last split, where G2, they were more afraid of Fnatic, because especially like back in spring when you guys were playing like lane swaps and like these kind of different strategies, than they were of like Misfits, who they were like, Misfits are basically just gonna play standard.
Discount G2.
And we play standard better than they do. So they were never afraid of them, but they were afraid of Fnatic because Fnatic would do unique things.
The random stuff.
And that's
you
the way
can't prepare for that either. You just kind of have to act on the fly. And I think
you kind of
only
guess
a very
a little
few
bit.
Teams and maybe even a few players in the history of League of Legends have been really good at acting on the fly. Like most teams just work out of preparation. And I think Misfits are a clear example of a team that just work off of preparation. And as soon as they go up against a team that do crazy stuff, like we've seen in a lot of these best of ones, they have no idea what to do.
Who's that guy in your team? Who's that guy who can see those opportunities?
I think Soaz is probably the best one at seeing this random stuff happening in the game. Like he's really good at calling, like enemy could be doing Nash now, and then we blue orb and it's like 4K, you know. No one else would ever see this coming, but he's really good at seeing these kind of things. And I think secondly, it's probably me. I've been enough for a long time now, so I've kind of seen everything that can happen in a game, and I try to like be aware of like all the possibilities. But I think he's probably the best at it, and then me. But I think we just have so much experience in comparison to like a team like Vitality. So even if we were to go up against them and they have all these X factors, we would still be fine because we have enough knowledge to look out for.
Well, that leads into something that's coming up next, because I want to move on to hit you. I want to move on and hit you with some Shoxin statements, which you can agree with or disagree with or argue about. That would actually be preferred.
Okay.
Let's see. First up, no team looks like they can come close to challenging Fnatic for the championship. Now, I don't think this one is extremely controversial. I just think that the way it's put, that no team could even come close, is possibly not completely true. But the way that you're speaking now about the strength you have over the possible opponents does make me feel like you actually believe this.
Well, as I said before, I feel like the only team that could actually beat us in a best of 5 is Misfits, which is really weird because they're last place and people are probably thinking I'm trolling, right?
And they beat you twice, yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like Misfits are the only team that actually like keep up with us in terms of macro. And I don't know why they're dropping all these random games. Maybe they're not taking it serious. Maybe they're not taking the preparation as well as they should. But whenever we have played against them and we do it in scrims, it just feels like they could potentially take us down 3 times on stage. So if we're able to avoid them, then I would say Vitality is probably the only other one that could surprise us in a best of 5. Otherwise, I feel like we should be more than fine. If we keep up, you know, the good work that we've had so far, I think we should be more than fine in our semifinals and not repeat last year's mistake.
Maurice?
The weird part of thing, I actually think that Vitality, for sure. I think that Misfits could potentially upset them. I mean, as in like, you know, the probability. But I also actually think that of all the teams that are still there, I think Schalke is a team that, like, supposedly, if they actually get their macro to the level that they should be at, which they still haven't
They play
shown.
too standard.
Yeah,
I actually agree on Schalke though. I think Schalke would be my third. If I said a team that could potentially beat us in best 5, it would be Schalke. But I think they're just like too off individually.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't seem like, you know, when you see the name, it doesn't feel like that's the guy actually playing. It feels kind of weird when you watch, but it just feels like they're not the same players that you expect them to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame because a team like Schalke should be theoretically like
Oh,
top
we
4.
tried to say that for 9 weeks. Sadly,
I mean, they're
it's
still
not
not
there.
out. And in actuality, tomorrow, their game versus you guys
And they
could
could
very
get
well
6
decide.
and then they would be seated against
If
us.
they,
in the
yeah, because if they
semifinals,
beat
so.
Fnatic, they probably still have to play a tiebreaker for number 6. But if they win that, obviously they're in. The way things are being played right now and the information we have from best of 1, then no one should be able to, like, based on what we're seeing
But then
now,
we think
beat
about
Fnatic.
last year, and I think that's also why Reckless is so careful, because last year in summer
Yeah,
it
we
was Misfits
flopped
that took you down.
in summer, yeah.
So
But I also think I'm a bit biased because all the teams I'm mentioning have like pretty good bot lanes, and I feel like that's where a lot of my like fear comes in. I guess fear is not the right word, but so you get what I mean, right? Like I feel like against most of the other teams, it's just really easy games because we have like so much better bot lane than the other teams, and I think bot lane is really impactful right now in the meta. If you get like the champions that can back it up, like maybe not Estral, but even in our Estral games, I've been doing just fine, and we've had like leads in the bot lane. So I feel like it's just easier games against other teams that doesn't have these bot lanes. But for example, against someone like Hans or Upset, other teams that doesn't have these bot lanes. But for example, against someone like Hans or Upset or even Mine Trupax, who have been doing pretty decently, I would say. I feel like it's just much harder, and we can't really get this like winning condition off of the bot lane anymore.
well, on the topic of good players in the bot lane, my next shocking statement is statistically Reckless is the MVP, but in reality, his team makes him look good.
Is that a bad thing?
Well, I don't know. You guys should discuss what it means.
I mean, I think 100% his team is part of making him look good. I think Caps especially, a lot of early in the split, when everything was involving him in the early game, actually gave a lot of freedom to Hylissang and Reckless.
Well,
to
the
then
Fisho, obviously I meant you could make an argument for other players like Jizuke and say
Oh,
he's
for being
doing it
MVP
all
or
on his
what?
own. Yes. It's not, you're not supposed to like roll over and die and just accept the statement.
No, I was
thing
going
is,
to
it's-
explain why I
it's not
agree with the
necessarily-
statement.
But do you feel like it's all statistics though? Because I know a lot of people are saying, you know, like, well, it's been like this forever, right? But people are always saying that I'm just like a statistics player and I don't actually do
KDA
anything
player?
other than, you know, get the numbers up.
I mean,
But is that actually true though? Because when I play, I feel like a lot of times, in pretty much actually every game, I have like one moment where I'm really clutching it, you know, like really making a difference within the game. And that is not something that numbers can justify. It's just the fact that I am who I am and I make the decision that I make, you know?
People are also actually, so whenever people mention, oh, he's a KDA player. I see that response instantly from 5 other players being, or 5.
Yeah,
being
no,
like,
I mean,
oh no, he's in the front
yeah.
line. He's actually, you know, he's actually playing aggressive. I think
I'm
in the
just curious
past,
about your opinion. If you actually feel like I'm an impact player, or if I actually just, you know, still play kind of safe, just take
I think
it slow.
season 5, you were not much of an impact player.
I agree.
Compared to now.
If I was an impact player season 5, I think we would have made it to Worlds Finals probably. Had a chance there. We were insane as a team back then, and I think the reason why we lost the semifinals was because we had no other choice than to play through top lane.
Yep.
So if I was really good in season 5, then we would have had a diversity within our game plan, and we couldn't just play through top lane. And against Smeb, it wouldn't work, right?
Does that
Smeb
still
is
bother
good
you?
enough. Yeah, I mean, it really bothers me because it was my chance to win Worlds.
Right there.
Absolutely.
And I screwed it up by not stepping up when it really mattered. Like I was just chilling that entire split. Like I'm gonna win every game anyway. So why would I bother changing anything, right? But then when it really mattered, we couldn't play through top lane anymore. And that's when they needed me, you know?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't practice to be there when it was needed.
Does it bother you that
So it bothers me,
people? Yeah, but does it bother you that people keep saying that? And I think, despite the statistics and all that, I think everyone who's honest with himself knows how good of a player Reckless is. If you look at a historical career, and there would be moments where it wasn't as good, like in 2015. But you can't honestly say that in the last 2 years you've been a bad AD carry, right? So does it bother you when people go and say that still?
I think 2015 I was fine still. Like maybe I wasn't an impact player, but I was really fine. But I think my worst split was probably 2016. I think I was not playing well, and I was really not an impact player either. It was
kind of
just
transition year. You tried to be it, but you couldn't.
I was just straight up mediocre.
You're trying to shot call,
I was not better than anyone. I wasn't worse than anyone. I was just there. You could barely see me in the games. I was not making an impact whatsoever.
To be fair, we barely saw Fnatic as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like that's very, mirrored by how I was as a player. So I would say 2016 was my worst year for sure. 2014 I was really fine. 2015 I think I just took things for granted. Maybe like I thought we would be successful in elements regardless of what I did. So I wasn't really trying to change things. And same goes for the summer split. But then last year I was much better, I think, than I've ever showed before. And then this year is even better. So
TLDR, you deserve the spring split MVP?
Yeah, I think if I should get it at some point, it should be now. Like I don't think I deserved it last summer, but I think last summer there were no good players other than me, so I understand that I got it. Yeah. But I think now I'm really smashing it in comparison to what I did last summer. So if I got it back then, I should really get it now. But I would understand if you gave it to someone like Caps, because I think Caps is also like
that's a big discussion
next level,
point, actually.
There's definitely going to be people voting for Caps as well.
Yeah,
so who's the third name? What about Perks? What about Jizuke? What about maybe Hansama? Let me know.
So it's really tough. I think that Perks, like, given that he basically won a lot of games for G2 in the beginning of the split, should be the third option. But then again, like, they look so bad now, and he's basically inting in a lot of games that I think the third option for me would right now actually be Jizuke or Kobe.
But I don't think an MVP player should be an impact player. Like, for example, when we were doing our MVP list, I'm not going to say who we voted for. Well, actually, people will see it anyway, so might as well. Okay, so we voted for players that we thought were not impact players, but actually, like, valuable players changing the team, because for example, like someone like Upset, you could put an MVP as MVP if you're considering MVP to be an impact player, because Upset wins a lot of games for Schalke, but he also loses a lot of games.
So
and I think Perks goes in the same category.
Something that I heard among the analysts is you can't take the players from teams that aren't performing.
I think you can.
I think you can, but they have
that
to,
individual players,
win games and not int in losses. But for example, Perks and Upset are players that do really well when they're winning. And they're the ones losing the game when they're losing. So I don't think you could give someone like that an MVP, because without him, they might as well also have had as many wins, because their play would have been consistent instead.
Amazing.
There's a really similar argument like in a lot of sports where it's either making your teammates better or if you're basically the shining light in games.
Yeah, it's always the discussion.
And that's why we voted for Kasing, because we felt like Kasing was enabling that team to play in a specific way, and no one could replace him and do the same thing.
Okay,
so we gave
it. But that's also because you guys know from behind the scenes his impact in communication.
Yeah, that too, but also just from like stage games and the Pixies playing. Like I think no one else could have played the champions that he was playing and not force the team, but allow the team to play in the way that they were playing. Like for example, let's say their support were just a melee player like everyone else in LCS, and then they were as bad as they were in the beginning, they wouldn't have won a single game. They would have lost every game because they would have never had late game. But because he was playing Janna, Cillian, they were winning their lanes. Like they smashed us in at least one of our games that we played against them. And then they always had the late game because he was playing really well on his e-girl, So I think you couldn't replace that guy, and that's why I would give him or put him up as an MVP candidate.
I think it's definitely fair. We need to move on, but it's on the same topic because we also asked you to give us your personal all-pro team for the ELCS Spring Split without any Fnatic players, because that is the rule. So let's take a look. If you also put Kasing there, I'm actually not sure about that. Yes, you did. You did.
Yeah, I did.
So Wonder top lane, Xerxes, Jizuke, Hansama, Kasing, all very interesting. We just heard Kasing, so let's start from top to bottom. Wonder if he did prove to me at least a lot in that last game.
That was a big argument backstage, by the way.
The thing is, everyone was so hyping him, right, back before, and I was saying that he's not as good as people are saying, which I still stand for. I don't think he's as good as people make him out to be, judging off his stats and all that. But I think he's still probably the best top laner after our own top laners. I think the others are just not good at all. Like, I think Weeb was really good. Like, Weeb was a really good player already, and he only played 2 games, but every scrim we play, and he's very like, what do you call it? It's very
vocal.
Yeah, there's a better word, but whatever. He's just like very into the team already. You know? He's not just sitting at the outskirts chilling. He's actually like making a lot of plans for the team, shot calling. You know, he's doing all these things that you could expect from a veteran player already. So I think other than our top laners, Wunder is the best top laner because everyone else is pretty bad, which is the sad truth, but this is just how it is.
All right, fair. I want to look at the jungle because I know Amazing might agree with you because you actually called out Xerxes as most improved jungler and maybe even best jungler at certain times in the last couple of weeks.
So the argument for Xerxes is basically like that. I think he has been the most consistent jungler out of, like, at least like recently. I think even in the beginning of the split, he kind of like obviously looked bad in the early game, but I think that was more of a team issue. And the better he became, the better Splice became. So for me, it's more or less he's basically a safe choice for first place because every other jungler has these on and off moments where one game they're completely inting, and one game they're carrying. Like
Xerxes is so consistent, always performs, no matter what. So plays every champion in the game. One of the few junglers we have in Europe that plays cheese as well. I mean, you could call it cheese, but for him, it's actually just like a strategy, right? Like Warwick and all these picks that we saw last year. He still has this in his pocket, and he can still put it out at any time. And I think that's just, you know, like he's just way up there.
Also benefits that Lee Sin has not been meta in forever. One of the champions he refused.
I find it solo queue without Grease Smite, and I could not play the game, so...
It's not that bad.
I think I'm just too bad.
It's not there. Thursday likes that because he doesn't want to play Lee Sin.
It's great on Zach. He's
really good at tank jungle.
You know, actually, last year we scouted him on his Smurf, and he had most played Lee Sin. So he was practicing it.
Oh.
Never on stage.
Never on stage.
Never played on stage.
He was practicing it.
Who's the best jungler if Lee Sin becomes top meta tomorrow? Maurice, Amazing
Broxah, maybe?
Broxah, I think.
I mean, Jankos would benefit from that as well.
Jankos Broxah. I think, like, at least what for my top 3, I think it's Xerxes, Broxah, and Jankos. Like, I'm not catching up the order, but Xerxes first. So, like, for me, it's just like these junglers, like, they bring some kind of consistency, and that's something that, like, I think so many people undervalue in junglers where they're like, oh, he ganks early, he's a good jungler, he does this, you know, like he makes this plays. It's so unimportant what kind of plays you make in general. The important part is to basically be a backbone for your team and enable them to play at a certain level every game. And if you can't do that, I don't think you're a great jungler. And I think that's where a lot of EU junglers, even though Joko, for example, like still like kind of fits that, he's not really elevating. Like
the entire game,
like he's not consistently elevating. He's one game elevating completely, and one game just eliminating completely.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think also that's just due to poor laners around him.
I mean, yeah, true.
Yeah, you kind of, you can't really put it all on the shoulders.
No, but you get my argument. You know, that's
I get it.
All right, cool. I don't think rather that there's a lot of discussion about the other two. We've mentioned Hansama already.
I mean, there is for mid.
For mid, yeah.
Yeah, Jizuke. I mean, so a lot of people are gonna have perks.
I would have put perks, but he's been inting for like 4 weeks straight now. So
yeah, so recent.
The whole problem with perks is the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, that's important.
2 weeks.
That is
it's only been 2 weeks. I thought it's only been 4 weeks.
It's been like 5 games now. Yeah.
Yeah,
it feels like forever. He's just inting every game.
So can you find less bad games from Jizuke, TLDR, then?
Yeah. I actually think Jizuke has had very few bad games this split.
Why do you think Perks has bad games, though? I don't understand why he has bad games. He's a good player, right? Like, no one can take that away from him.
Fantastic.
So at least he should have a lot of knowledge from the last 2 years.
So what I think...
Yeah.
Why would he be in a slump? Like,
what I think
something going on within the team, maybe? Or
if you look from the outside, like... At least like in the last couple of weeks, I think G2 has like obviously been struggling as a team. They have been really, really bad on this patch ever since like the vision changes. And what I think his position, like point of view is right now, like, okay, my bot lane is really not integrated.
Probably stressed, right? Yeah, like really stressed out.
And he feels like he has to make that play in order for them to win because he always knows that his bot lane is going to fall behind at some point because that's been happening every game of the split, honestly. And I think he feels so pressured to carry the top side of the map, especially with Wunder now playing a lot of tanks besides today, obviously, that he's like the sole carry in the team. That's in his mind, at least.
which is why I think, even though today there's a lot of bad things for G2, at least towards the end, the fact it became a lot more about Wonder specifically could benefit G2 in the long run, because it seemed very clear that Perkz felt like if he didn't carry, no one would carry. In the last, like, since 8.4, basically, where it went downhill from them. So I hope that they understand that they need to keep trying to play some carries top lane for this current lineup to work, because otherwise it's all on Perkz, and clearly that didn't work for them in 2 weeks.
It's a token for Perkz and for a good player that even when he's not on the list and the player being talked about, he's still being talked about.
I mean, he's such a big name. You have to talk about him when he's not on the list.
Right. Well, we
Who would you
need
guys
to
put
move
on AD carry if it wasn't Hans, by the way? I was just going to ask about Hans, because I know a lot of people are not very impressed with him, right? But I am, so it becomes like an easy choice for me, but maybe for other... I don't know what people are putting, other than myself, obviously.
Kobe would be my choice.
Because I'm not even putting Kobe in my top 3, so...
He would be my choice. Yeah, okay. Based on everything, when it comes to how Splyce have been winning games, especially in the late game, it's been a lot about setting him up to succeed, and I think he's been playing teamfights really well. So I would put him as mine. I think Hans loves his early start, praised him, called him the best AD carry when I was flaming Reckless the first 2 weeks. But the last few weeks, laning phase is still good from him, but he's had a lot of teamfights when they play Ezreal, and they rely a lot on him on 2 items, where he then, with everything available, gets caught out, dies in a fight, or dies just before the fight, and then the team just, they don't get ahead from it, and everything just slows down for Misfits, they get outscaled. So he wouldn't be my #1 choice, even if I actually think that he is individually. Yeah, mine would be Kobe.
Is Kobe Danish?
He is Danish.
Oh.
But aren't we all in the EU LCS one way or the other?
For the amount of times we see that sausage video played, I would think we're all Danish.
We also watch the entire show, so we see it many times.
That's true. Okay, let's move on. Thank you very much for delivering us your all-pro team. But let's take a look at the matches and what these players can do in the final day of the regular season. The schedule will come up in just a second. G2 versus Vitality, we already touched on it. Direct battle for second place. If Vitality win, they lock that second place. If G2 win, then it comes to tiebreakers. Then Roccat versus H2K. If Roccat win, they're in playoffs. So maybe let's look at Giants versus Splyce, friends, because Giants is a team that we don't actually talk about that much, and they're always there, and they're still in the race.
They're always, like, I don't know, whenever I think of Giants, I think they should lose every game, basically, they're playing almost. You know, like,
But why?
Because they have so, like... Okay, so in a lot of wins, and this may sound like I'm hating on them, but I think in a lot of wins, they honestly just benefit of others playing bad. So it's like the enemy team is trolling, that's why they're winning. It's not like the Giants just playing clean macro, or they're playing clean individually. I think in a lot of wins...
but a lot of teams are then trolling.
Yeah, I think they just play the game, and
so like
their individual players are the reason why they win games. Like sometimes, as I said before, like Joker goes off and wins them a game. Sometimes Ruin won them a game beforehand. I think the problem that they have is that they don't really have like a carry now that Betsy is not really carrying games anymore. I feel like Steelback is actually better than people give him credit for, but not good enough. So people say he's like the worst AD we have seen in a long time, right?
No,
like oftenly, I just hear that people just trash talk Steelback straight up.
He's had really
when I don't think it's true. I think he's more than fine. I think he's like same level as a lot of other AD carries that were even like considered good for last year. I think like Samox, for example. I think he's just as good as Samox, if not even better. But he's not good enough to carry a game, and Betsy's not carrying either, so they don't win against the good teams because they just can't match up. Like, for example, today I felt like they should have done a lot more than they did when they had Rice, Sarah Khan, Shogun, Sejuani. There's good composition that they got drafted from their coach, and they didn't do anything really with it at all.
I think just one of the reasons also we talk so little about Giants now is because they got most of their wins in the first few weeks. They were obviously 5-1 because they were one of the first teams. True. They were one of the first teams among most.
With Rocket, right?
Giants.
They're 2-9.
I mean, Giants and Rocket were the teams that were like picking up so many wins.
Wait, so they're 2-9 since then?
They've lost a lot of games since then compared to #1, but they were one of the first teams to realize that you should just draft full late game teamfight comms. They were easier to play than the 1-3-1 split push that the other teams were trying to do. They got to late game every time, and then they just smacked people in teamfights.
That was more about Betsy, though, wasn't it? Like with Asir.
He carried really hard in this year. He carried really hard in this year.
That's something we were actually looking out for today, that we were putting him on a non-late game champion, and then we didn't really care too much about Steelback because we knew, like, once it really gets down to it, 40 minutes, 45 minutes into the game, Steelback won't carry that teamfight. But we were scared kind of Betsy
Yeah, Betsy
doing
could.
it, so.
He did it.
I hate to cut you guys short, but we do have to move on. We've been talking for a very long time, and I think
Sorry.
that is because it was so interesting. I actually learned a lot about practically every
Feels like
team.
a podcast in here.
Yeah, it's like a podcast with cameras. Oh, we do want
Oh, we
that.
don't do that with
We do
cameras.
want
No,
that.
don't give them any hope here now.
Alrighty, well, that's it for us soon. But over in North America, LCS Academy is underway with CLG versus Optic Gaming. And if you missed any of the EU LCS tonight, be sure to tune in for our rebroadcast after the show in Los Angeles, so you can watch League of Legends all through the night. But that was all from us here in Berlin. Thank you guys so much for the wonderful discussion. And we'll see you all back here tomorrow for the final day of the regular season. See you then.
Ciao.
Tschüssi.
Tschüssi.
The German?
Yeah.
Be careful, teleport's near to complete. There's the quickest bomb skew, get the oh! That's a big Meganar, and Upset is not going to be feeling too happy after that one. Yeah, mix that one up, and they go once more, trying to get the ganks off inside the brush. Chachi falls. They're just giving ground here. Nothing they can do. Systematic destruction into H2K. The playoff dream is alive. Late game, and they're two-manning this. Here he goes! Before he's going to fall with Prophet coming in, and the Sand Soldiers there. They just exhaust him for the hell of it.
They use any sums? No.
That's going to be the ace, and that is going to be it. As the final towers falls, Senkux looks on because Rocket are blasting off to victory.
And our match of the week between Splice and Vitality.
To the root, Nisky down the front line, just make the smash, they're going to chase in. The stun, Jizuke dodging to the back, and the lantern in time, no!
What the hell did I just do?
As well, Jizuke still alive for the South, but there's the heal, there's the invulnerability, there's the double stun, there's Jizuke going down, and Splice have answered Vitality. The mini two-pack, the Portuguese sniper is going to run them down! There is no escape from Vitality, and Splice have nothing left to give! But Vitality should be able to get this one, the Nexus goes down! Going to try and chase on towards the rest of Giants, the double knockback with the never move, the knockup of Chaos Guipo coming in for the side as well. There's just nothing you can do. There's the triple kill. Reckless gets the quadra going for the penta. What a way to cap it up. But no! Steelback stops him in his track.
No!
And to continue to solidify their dominance at the very top of the EU LCS. And here comes the slam. They're going to knock up on towards, but did the charm, the double charm on the backline. Here's the hero's entrance, and the ground erupts as XL jumps in to G2, and G2 collapse. Inhibitor forward, the Baron's still alive. Cold jumps up, jumps down. Gianna's still alive in this backline. Samus has a lot of feathers out though, and he brings them back. XL does. Alex gets him. Unicorns looking for something because there's nothing going right for them anywhere on the map at all. G2 keeping their hopes alive in the race for second place with this win over the Unicorns.
Det handler om arv.